Writing a character is easy. Bringing them to life on an empty page can be terrifying. Today, Sam and his jar of hope will finally come to life as we write the opening image of Lost Boy. In the last few episodes, we've met Sam, a 10-year-old orphan boy. His uncle left him 3 years ago at an orphanage with two things: a jar of hope and a promise he'd be back. Then we got Master Ironhand, the headmaster at the same orphanage. He believes that hope is poison and trust is a trap, and he teaches this to the kids. Now, let's go battle that empty page. As usual, I'm going to use StorySteps. You don't have to, but if you want to follow along using StorySteps, you can create an account for free on StorySteps.net. Now, I'm going to start Sam off inside a rattling carriage being returned to the orphanage by a foster family. So 10-year-old Sam sits inside a rattling carriage. And I'm not actually going to have you watch me write all of this out. So I'm going to fast forward through this. We're going to read through the sequence events, and then I'm going to explain what I'm doing and why. So, 7-year-old Sam walks hand in hand with his uncle down a quiet street in early 1900s England. His uncle speaks in a calm, steady voice, choosing his words carefully when the talk drifts towards Sam's parents. For a moment, the world feels manageable, as long as his uncle's hand doesn't let go. And I'm going to stop there for a second because this line, if you are writing for the screen, that very last line is not something you should use, because it's interiority. It goes on inside the protagonist's mind. If you're writing for a novel, you can use that. And I am doing both, so I'm going to leave it in there. All right. So his grip tightens as they stop outside a gated orphanage. His uncle apologizes, explaining he has no work and he can't support them, but that he'll be back. He takes out a small stone jar and presses it into Sam's hands, saying it contains hope, then tucks an identical one into his own coat. But how can hope live in a jar? His uncle says that hope can live in the smallest, darkest places. Wake up! The memory abruptly cuts off as Sam jerks back to the present. 10-year-old Sam sits inside a rattling carriage as the foster woman snaps. She explains, tired and resigned, that they tried, but some children simply don't settle the way you hope. She chooses her words carefully, avoiding specifics, but she still shifts the blame towards Sam. Families can only bend so far, especially for a boy who isn't of their own blood. Sam does not answer. He slips a hand inside his coat and clutches a concealed stone jar. It glows faintly as he touches it. So, checkpoint 1. We are setting the mood, the tone, and the genre. The way we do this is, actually let's first discuss what is the difference between mood and tone, because they tend to be a bit fuzzy on the definitions. So the mood is the way you make your audience feel when they read or watch your story. The tone is your tool as a writer to achieve that feeling within your audience. So in practical terms, as a writer, they tend to be so closely related that it doesn't even matter. But they can be different. For example, let's find a line here. Sam does not answer. He slips a hand inside his coat and clutches his concealed stone jar. So the voice here is plain, restrained, and close to Sam. But the mood is, I would say, lonely, guarded, and fragile. But we could write a different tone or voice to this. Tone and voice are the same thing. You'll see some people talk about your writer's voice. It's the same as the tone. But let's try a different tone here. Let's write this for children now for a second. Sam did not say anything. He put his hand in his coat and held the little jar tight because it was his, and no one else was allowed to have it. We have that same lonely, guarded, fragile mood here, but we have a simpler voice suitable for children. And we have that childlike logic to it. So that's how you can have a different tone but the same mood as a writer. So let's look at the genre. How do we achieve that in here? Let's see. 7-year-old Sam walks hand in hand with his uncle down a quiet street in early 1900s England. So if we look at that alone, it might sound like we're headed into a historical drama. But right at the end, I put in, it glows faintly as he touches it. Now we're referring to the stone jar. And that last line shows us that there's magic in here. We're headed into fantasy territory as well, because stone jars don't just glow. So that's a subtle hint of the genre. And that's all you need. Now let's look at checkpoint 2, a clear visual image. This is a snapshot. Let's take a snapshot of something that happens in this small piece of text in your opening image. If you were to take that snapshot and frame it and put it in an art gallery, you want someone, if someone stops there, you want them to be able to figure out your mood, your tone, your genre, and perhaps get an idea of where this story is going just by looking at that still frame. Let's take this image. Sam sits inside a carriage. We have the bleak orphanage looming in the background, and we have Sam's stone jar. Now we get an idea of what kind of story this is. We don't know that we're headed for Neverland later, but we know that it's a fantasy, it's historical, we can see their clothing, we can see how Sam feels just by looking at that still frame. So that's how you check for that test. It is highly subjective, but if you're honest with yourself, usually that's enough to find if you're covering this checkpoint. Now, checkpoint 3 is we need to hint at what's wrong in your hero's life. Because we don't write stories where everything is just perfect in the hero's life at the start of the story, because they have nowhere to go, nowhere to change for the better. So let's look at a few lines from Lost Boy. Where do we drive this home? First, we have this line I mentioned before. For a moment, the world feels manageable as long as his uncle's hand doesn't let go. That tells us that his uncle is someone that he cares about. He loves his uncle. And now we have this line where his uncle apologizes, explaining he has no work and he can't support them, but that he'll be back. Now he's being left by a person that he cares about. We also have a subtle hint earlier that his parents are gone, so he's been left before. He has experienced a lot of abandonment. And now we are back with a foster woman who says families can only bend so far, especially for a boy who isn't of their own blood. So he's not exactly getting a feeling of belonging even when he was with the family. So what is he missing? Well, he's missing belonging. He's missing that sense of family. So that's how we hint at what's missing or what's wrong. Checkpoint 4, we set up a contrast with the final image of the story. And you might not know what your final image is going to look like yet. And that's also why I'm never checking this off in StorySteps at this point. I'm thinking ahead. I'm thinking, where is this story likely to end? And then I'm trying to set it up so that we contrast that likely ending. So, for example, now, while we have this for a moment, the world feels manageable as long as his uncle's hand doesn't let go. Now, maybe we'll see his uncle return at some point. Maybe in the end he walks away from the orphanage with his uncle. Or let's take the rattling carriage. Maybe his uncle and Sam are in that rattling carriage at the end of the story and they are leaving the orphanage for a better place. But it might not be his uncle. It might just be that he gets a family. But you should contrast the likely ending, and a good way to think of it is, what does your hero missing? So either you give them that thing or you put them somewhere even worse if you want to do a dark story. But there must be contrast with the ending. Let's do checkpoint 5. Avoid heavy exposition. For example, she chooses her words carefully, avoiding specifics, but she still shifts the responsibility towards Sam. For example, she's not saying, as you know, we are now sending you back to the orphanage because we don't want you in our family anymore, even though we have previously tried to adopt you. And most writers know not to put it quite that obvious in there. But think about it, when you write dialogue, or even when you write stuff that isn't dialogue, am I hinting at something or am I explaining it? If you feel like you're explaining it, then those lines have to go and you have to find something more subtle. Don't underestimate your audience. They pick up on these things. And then we have the final line, it glows faintly as he touches it. I could have here written, he has a magical jar. Or I could have even put him in a scene where he's explaining to another boy that, hey, I got this magical jar, it sometimes glows. We want the subtle hint, but not the over-explaining. So let's look at this in StorySteps. You have this entire checklist in StorySteps. So if you write your own story, you could put it into StorySteps and you'll find that checklist there. I'm also going to put it on the StorySteps website if you prefer to download it as a PDF. I'm going to put a link in the description for both. So the opening image should show your hero in their ordinary world in a way that reveals mood, tone, and genre. It should create a visual that could serve as a poster or a still image that you could frame. You should hint at what's missing or wrong in your character story at the beginning of the story. You should set up a contrast with how your story is likely to end, and you should avoid heavy exposition. Show, don't tell. This is the checklist. Try to apply that to your story. You'll find that it gets much clearer and people will know what they're getting themselves into right from the start. Now, that concludes session 5 of the 25-day story series by StorySteps. At the end of this series, you're going to see this Lost Boy idea go from a simple idea to a complex story with characters, conflict, all the nuts and bolts to hold it together. Next time, we're going to zoom out of the opening image and we're going to look at the larger setup phase and we're going to build that together. I'll see you then.